Thank you so much, and thank you to GCTC for once again speaking about some of the most important issues that confront us when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. In particular, some months ago, I remember we had a very important dialogue when it came to the youth of Kashmir. There are so many parts to this dialogue. And it is very important that the rehabilitation, the reconciliation with Kashmiri Pandits in particular remains at the forefront of any conversation, because this is the hopes going forward is for a comprehensive resolution of the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. I don't want to speak too much, and I know that each of our guests today are experts of their own. They've thought about these issues for long enough. I just want to make the point that when we talk about the external threat, many would ask, why should we discuss Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan at all? Why should we talk about Pakistan in the middle of all of this? And the truth is that there are several reasons, particularly on the issue of Kashmiri Pandits, as we mark those terrible days in 1990, where it is important to keep that part of the dialogue, keep that part of the engagement going. What happened in 1990 was without doubt ethnic cleansing. It was ethnic cleansing carried out by groups either from Pakistan or with the support of groups in Pakistan as well as the establishment. Justice, truth, and reconciliation, therefore, is going to require an acknowledgement from Pakistan at some point or the other. And we shouldn't give up hope for that, given just that we have seen, when it comes to Bangladesh today, 50 years later, we still hear the government of Bangladesh making the point that reconciliation will require an acknowledgement from Pakistan of what happened, will require some kind of an apology. The second point is every leader in Jammu and Kashmir, I've covered the state for more than 25 years now, and I can say even amongst separatist members that we have spoken to over the years have always said that Jammu and Kashmir's reconciliation is incomplete without the return of Kashmiri Pandits. This is an important sentiment to look at, even if it has been so unsuccessful over all of these years. And the third really is that there is a responsibility of the center over here to ensure the safety, the ability of Kashmiri Pandits to return to Jammu and Kashmir. That responsibility, and I don't want to be controversial as the chairperson of this group, but I do want our speakers to deal with it. That responsibility will ensure in some way engaging the forces that pose the greatest threat to that kind of reconciliation and that kind of rehabilitation, and Pakistan is certainly amongst those. So without further ado, I do hope some of these issues do begin what I hope is a lively conversation over the next hour and a half. I do hope to be able to take questions. So if you have questions, you can just put up your hand or put something in the chat box that tells me you would like to ask a question, maybe what the subject of the question is, so that I plan the conversation accordingly with all our speakers today. Could I ask Mr. Punj to begin this discussion today? Mr. Balbir Punj, if he's with us, is of course a former member of parliament as well. Mr. Punj?
He's joining in a few minutes.
Okay, so we can then just move on. I'm sorry, we have a list over here, so I'm just going to go through as it is. If General KJ Singh, Lieutenant General KJ Singh is with us.
Thank you, Suhasini ma'am. It's always a pleasure to be in a session which is being moderated by you, because you bring in so much of expertise on this subject that one is little apprehensive that where to start and what to start off with. And here I also find the thing that suddenly our top order batsman has got out, and then I am here as the night watchman. So, okay, let me try and be Shubman Gill, who's from my city, and he's at least brought a lot of here to all of us.
See a
A
lot
lot
of
of
smiling faces on the chat today. I think we're all still very euphoric from the win today.
yes. So, ma'am, let me try and get inspired by him and start as a night watchman. Let me start by doing that. See, the problem in, and I am going to give a little contrarian opinion. I may be excused for that. The problem with us is we are too focused on Pakistan and we want to solve Pakistan. Am I audible, please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the problem is we want to solve Pakistan by a method that we have decided for ourselves. Well, I am not too sure it can be done like this. Uh, George Fernandez had told us that China is the main threat. We refused to prepare for it properly and we got caught out. And now we are forced to rebalance toward China. So, what and how effective we'll be able to take that hard power solution against Pakistan has become questionable. It's come under some amount of questioning because if you're going to move forces out of the same kitty from west to north, then obviously west is going to get diluted. So your hard power options are getting, uh, if not, they're not getting compromised, but they're getting reduced for sure. So that is one opening shot that I want to try. Now, we have closed for ourselves options of diplomatic engagement. And we had taken a line that it is talks and terror will not go together. We also took that line that water and terror will not flow together. But see, Indus Water Treaty is one huge big leverage we have. And it's not only to deny water to Pakistan, it is also to use our justified share of water. Why I am bringing these two issues together is because Indus Water Treaty and two have the same analogies that they'll not flow together. Terror and talks and water and talks will not, water and terror will not flow together. So, but see the limitations. Can we stop water? Is it possible to do it overnight? It can't happen. We have to build reservoirs. We are doing it. Great credit to this government. Shahpur Kandi is coming up on Ravi. We'll be able to use that water. What was delayed and stymied for so many years because of fight between J&K and Punjab. And I remember having met Minister of J&K who was part of BJP and PDP government who told me, Sardar Saab, and he also ties a turban. You can guess estimate who's that minister. He ties a turban also, and his name starts with a beautiful red color. Rest is for you to judge. So he told me, Sardar Saab, I was trying to tell him we must do this because for security is an important issue, and Ravi water must be harnessed. We need to put this water in Tavi Link Canal. So people of Jammu, Kathua, Samba need that water. And more than that, it has got defense potential. So I was trying to tell him this. And he said, Sardar Saab, Punjab ने हमारी insult की है. हम उनको होने नहीं देंगे. Egos were stopping us. Thank God this central government took that stand and we are doing something about it. Lots is happening on Chenab. But what I am trying to bring the discussion to is that things take time. So for us to have legislated and decided that we'll have no talks with Pakistan, I am not too sure. And I do not blame this government completely because I give great credit to PM Modi who went to meet Nawaz Sharif. And now that book, President's Men, is out, where the president, Pranab Mukherjee, late president, has himself said that he didn't approve of it. There was no diplomatic narrative to that. And he defied everything and took that risk. So we can't say as if that PM Modi didn't take risk. Our prime ministers have taken individual risks. Vajpayee Saab went to on bus diplomacy. Manmohan Singh yielded more than by accepting that famous thing we talk about. And even PM Modi tried. But thereafter, Pathankot happened. But I am not too sure as to what other leverages we have on Pakistan. I'm not too sure. So that is one question that we all must address. And can we isolate Pakistan in international community? Is it possible? Is it possible to build and leverage through that? Okay, let me try a scan which would have be better done by an expert like Suhasini ji, who's I have heard in so many debates doing this kind of thing in a very professional way. But let me do some of it, and maybe she will embellish it further later. Uh, our desire to see Pakistan as a failed state and failing state is little too optimistic. Pakistan is not going to fail in a hurry. Pakistan is geographically located at a place where the world community will not allow it to fail. And Pakistan is more adept than us, more nimble than us, more agile than us. It tends to make alignments or alliances better than us. It was at one time with US, and today also, if US, before it tries to snap things with Pakistan, it will have to think many times, because the problem of Afghanistan has been outsourced literally to Taliban and Pakistan. So Pakistan has that leverage. You can't just wish it away. And now with China having joined as an iron brother, the problem has got compounded. China has put CPAC over there. It has built a stake into Pakistan, and there are very real dangers of Pakistan being pushed or given a little bit of a tacit go ahead that you need India from this side. So that collusivity, that collusive threat has become even more relevant now. So that is another thing we must take note of. So having looked at USA and China on a macro platform, I'm not trying to do a micro analysis of this. Where does USSR stand? Today there are question marks. If we've thought that USSR is going to always bail us out in Security Council, it is not longer happening. Even UK did not bail us out. So who's going to bail us out? Probably France. Because France, because of Rafale and such like deals, we have got a strategic partnership with them. So I come back to the question of Russia. Russia is getting far too comfortable in a tie-up with China, and is definitely not with USA. It is far away from there. European Union is not too much on it, this thing. So Russia is, in my perception, not very much disinclined. I'm forced to use diplomatic words to get closer to Pakistan, because Pakistan is a business proposition. America now doesn't give them arms. So till S-400 leverage we have, but how long will that leverage be is a question mark. So our reliance on China, on Russia as a strategic partner is becoming questionable, and Pakistan may take advantage of it. What about Organization of Islamic Countries? Well, out of those countries, Turkey and Malaysia are definitely with Pakistan. Iran, we are not too sure. Our links with Iran have become questionable, because Iran has also become too close to China. And somewhere, where does Pakistan fit into this narrative is question mark. There are issues like Shia bomb and Sunni bomb. Today, Pakistan has an Islamic bomb, but moment Iran makes a bomb, then it will become a Sunni bomb. It will remain only a Sunni bomb, and Iran, because of this insecurity, is only moving towards a bomb which will probably be called Shia bomb, because that's how the clans are divided, and they don't trust each other. In Pakistan, Shias are treated very badly. But it is to credit of this government that they managed to somehow wean away some of the traditional allies of Pakistan, which is Saudi Arabia, UAE, and to a certain extent other Gulf states like Bahrain. Qatar is still not into our camp that way. So we are now looking at leverages. What are our leverages? How do we influence Pakistan? Internal fault lines of Pakistan is not part of this discussion. They will manifest in Balochistan, Sindh. They are already happening. Some will happen in Gilgit, Baltistan also. So, ma'am, how much more time I have got? Suhasini ji?
Jency, I would leave it to you. If you'd like to speak for another 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, I will take 5 more minutes. I'll try to
Thank you.
wind up. Because, Shubman Gill has only got a range of strokes. Beyond that, he can't play. It has to be done by the mainstay batsman.
I'm sure that's not true, sir. You're giving us a very comprehensive look at how confronting Pakistan is difficult in the geopolitical situation. So please continue. Don't feel constrained.
Our leverages are limited. And now, when we look at our neighborhood, despite our India first policy, it's not as if we have too many neighbors on our side. Bangladesh is to a certain extent with us, but up to the regime of Sheikh Hasina, if there is anti-incumbency, we have to build linkages in the other parties also. Nepal is a difficult case for us. Sri Lanka is too autonomous to be influenced by us. And Maldives may be in our kitty. So something like this we can. Bhutan, of course, has been a traditional ally. Actually, I beg forgiveness of you. We have no right to call any country in our kitty. That is where the problem has been. All these countries are independent. We must respect them and somehow convince them to be partners with us. And that's how we could probably take this narrative forward. But allow me to submit to this learned body that our famous foray of trying to cut SARC and form BBIN and go the BIMSTEC route and try towards Act East I leave it to you all. Has it worked? In the process, SARC is completely it's on a ventilator. It's in that kind of a state. If that be so, where have we reached? BBIN has not made any progress. BIMSTEC is some kind of euphoric kind of an alliance, which is not a real this thing. And our Act East policy is also not got traction as yet. It hasn't got traction. So if that be so, we seriously must look at the possibilities of somehow through the track 2 and some other means to look at reviving linkages with Pakistan, at least in the soft power domain. And vaccine diplomacy could be one way out. Right. Pakistan is looking for vaccines. It does not have vaccines. And health is one issue where India has always been very benign. We remember Sushma Swaraj, who did so much, though she didn't get full credit. At least I feel very sorry for Pakistan. And that's why I call them very ungrateful that they didn't support or they didn't realize how much Sushma Swaraj did for their people who were terminally ill in Pakistan by arranging liver transplants, kidney transplants, and many such noble ventures she did. So, is there a way out now that through the route of vaccine diplomacy, we once again try and forge linkages? We carry on with our forays on building reservoirs, and slowly Pakistan will realize, it is beginning to realize. And in any case, we need that water, besides the leverage part of it. We are a water-stressed country, we need water. Remain focused on that. Retain essential qualities, capabilities on Western border, and hone those capabilities. Hone in the sense, now the days of large-scale campaigns are over. So in hard power domain, we have to have punitive capabilities, surgical punitive capabilities. Like if we have to do Balakot again, then we should be able to do in that limited sphere and hit them harder than last time, so that the lesson is retained for a longer span of time. No lessons are permanent, that is for sure. And for a country like Pakistan, ma'am, I'll now take 1 more minute, please, with your permission. Mm-hmm. When we deal with Pakistan, I am reminded of how we are dealing with farmers. Do pardon my saying what I'm going to say now. I'm a farmer myself. See, in Punjab, there is a saying, "Pyar naal saadi jaan bhi le lo. Te jora mardi naal asi pinde di juu bhi nahi deange."
You'll have to translate.
With lots of love, or with some love, you can take our life also. We'll give our life to you. But if you try force with us, we will not part with lice on our body. which we want to kill in any case. So if that be the thing, Pakistan is same stock of people. They are same guys, Bajwas, and all these guys are same. They're Punjabis converted into Musliman. That's all. So dealing with them beyond a point, hard power has limits.
Right.
It cannot be beyond a point when you use too much of hard power and start banking only on that. They get hardened. It's like our soldiers in defenses. First round when it comes, he's scared. He wants to run for cover. Shekhar Dutt sir is hearing. He's an artillery gunner. He knows how to give it good to enemy. And when that comes, a person runs in fear and panic. But after he's been there for 2-3 months, he's gone through a couple of barrages. He says, "Aane do, or aane do." I know where it is coming and when it is coming. So Pakistanis also probably have come to that stage. And my final submission is that hard power has limitations. Look at soft power and some other leverages. Thank you for the opportunity. Jai Hind.
All right. Jai Hind, sir. It's interesting that we start our session expecting that we will get a fiery start from Lieutenant General KJ Singh. But of course, we've got a pitch over here for actual engagement with Pakistan while keeping our defenses high. I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions for you. But I will ask everyone to put in their questions and we'll try to take them at the end of all the speakers. I'd like to turn now to Mr. Kuldeep Khoda, if I may. He's, of course, famously the former DG of police in Jammu and Kashmir. And many of us as journalists have benefited from his wisdom and his experience while he was in that position. Mr. Khoda, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I see you now. If you'd like to give us how you think the external dimension of Jammu and Kashmir and in particular Pakistan must be confronted, particularly with a view, if we can look at this idea that, Kashmiri reconciliation is incomplete without Kashmiri Pandits.
Thank you, Swasni. Take this opportunity also in wishing Mr. Shekhar Dutt. He is visiting us lots of times and guiding us during the troubled period, particularly when I was DGP for 5 years. During that time, we had the honor of getting a lot of guidance from him. And I will take on from where General Singh left. And I would like to, while I don't disagree with what he has said about the need for talks and need for resolution, because ultimately the confrontation has to be converted into some sort of resolution through debate. Most of the issues have been solved through debate, but at the same time, we have to be sure as to when that debate should actually start, because any debate has to be fruitful with an end result which meets our national interests, which is in accordance with our requirements, the integrity of the nation. In the past, we have seen that engaging with Pakistan has not given us much, except for delaying our response to the continuous terrorist actions. And before the terrorist actions in 1990, we had 3 wars with them. Let me briefly mention the fact that Pakistan has never been a dependable country as far as our engagement with them has been concerned. They have always tried to deceive us or backstab us by posturing to us as well as to international community that they are in favor of peaceful resolution. But at the same time, they have been originating terrorism and they have been following it with sustenance, with the policy of not ending it at any time in near future at least. the funding of terrorism is continuing. The training at their training camps is continuing. The fresh recruitment is continuing. The flow of funds is continuing. And I don't see any wisdom, at least at this stage, in entering into talks with them and expecting that we'll get any sort of bargain in the process or any fruitful movement forward in resolving our conflict with them. So whether it was 1947 tribal raid supported by their army, and prior to that they had given and sort of entered into an agreement with Maharaja that they will not disturb the status of J&K until the then Maharaja decides where to get aligned with, whether with India or Pakistan. But they didn't observe that and sent their army. Then 65, they again tried to capture Kashmir through an armed insurgency of the regulars. 71, we know how it developed, and later on in 71, when they came on their knees, when they had to surrender in the then East Pakistan, and in the Shimla summit, when it was generally given to understand by the then Prime Minister Bhutto that Pakistan is agreeing in principle to convert the LOC or the ceasefire line then into a regular border. But later on, instead of trying to make any forward movement on that, at that time it was given to understand that they are only asking for time to settle the Kashmir issue once and for all. But instead of that, the response was development of Operation Topak, and its execution is even continuing now. So again, we have seen during phase of terrorism that once we enter into talks, it probably snatches the opportunity from us of trying to be in the driver's seat as far as response to terrorism is concerned, because when the talks are, if there are talks held, we don't want to leave the international community to be looking at us as some sort of violating the talks or trying to derail the talks by entering into conflict like Balakot strikes or the surgical strikes in Udi. So the only thing that can develop is that we'll lose the initiative of responding to Pakistan's continued terrorism, because they have not shown any such move to indicate that they are trying to reduce the levels of terrorism in Kashmir. So where does it lead us to? It leads us to developing a policy which can give us results which are in tune with our security requirements. And vis-a-vis Pakistan, our country is a big country, both from military power, from the population, from the economic development. We are a much bigger economic power. In every respect, we are far, far ahead of Pakistan. But because of because of our changing stand on dealing with Kashmir continuously, or dealing with Pakistan continuously, especially during the last 3 decades, where our responses have not resulted into any sort of decisive action as far as bringing peace to the subcontinent is concerned. So, we have to look beyond what we have been doing till now. We have the examples of many countries in the world who have very successfully dealt with these sorts of confrontations from the neighboring countries. The biggest example is of Israel, which fought 7 countries simultaneously, despite being a much smaller state than them, and has virtually brought terrorism to under total control in their territory. And European countries and US also did not take much to respond to terrorism and and provide a peaceful atmosphere to their citizens. We have the example of our small neighbor Sri Lanka, which dealt very decisively with LTT terrorism, which was also internationally supported by many vested interests. And Myanmar has also been very effective in controlling their situation. That leaves us with a big question as to why we are not able to make much headway. Yes, the security forces have been doing a very wonderful job. The security forces and police combined, who have been able to eliminate thousands and thousands of terrorists, including their commanders. But this has become a very continuous process now. Terrorists getting killed. We also taking on casualties in the process. The citizens also under total turbulence. Fresh terrorists being sent in, and that leaves us virtually nowhere. Probably we have come to a stage where a feeling has developed among the people that government probably is not very keen into resolving this issue once for all. So we have to take certain lessons. They most often measures which have been suggested, which General Singh also brought out. I would like to categorize them mainly into the economic, our economic strategy against vis-a-vis Pakistan, the diplomatic strategy, and of course the military actions, whether it is covert or overt actions against Pakistan, to deliver the results. So as far as economic measures are concerned, yes, the Indus Valley Treaty, I would not like to elaborate it more. General Singh has already mentioned it in detail. We have to follow it now. Precisely, we have to develop a national policy to deal with this problem, to deal with Pakistan, to confront Pakistan decisively and once for all. And whether it is trade, whether it is Indus Water Treaty, whether it is any sort of bilateral economic cooperation, we have to have a very clear policy on that. The economists and those dealing with foreign affairs and diplomatic officers can probably give much better opinion on this than any other section of the society. But we need to have a very clear-cut policy. I'm happy that the bilateral trade between India and Pakistan via the Jammu and Kashmir border with Pakistan has stopped, despite it being known from virtually all intelligence agencies, and also because of the certain cases which were cracked where the terrorists and others were arrested and who revealed that this trade was being used for financing terrorism. It did not stop for a long time. It only took major terrorist actions by Pakistan, which finally woke up our government into stopping this trade. So that was a measure which initially was started with good intentions, but which resulted into financing of terrorism through the cross-border trade. Similarly, I think we have to think seriously about all other economic measures to deal with Pakistan. Pakistan is already reeling under tremendous debt. Its external debt as of last year, December, was 112 billion US dollars. And its internal debt is in the range of about 270 billion US dollars, which is the internal debt alone is 107% of its GDP. And this is getting further compounded by the Belt and Road Initiative, the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, wherein, which is a $62 billion project. And China is financing it, and Pakistan is repaying the loans by taking further finances from China, and in the process it is falling in a debt trap. I mean, to me it seems, as a person who is not professionally a specialist in trade matters or economic matters, but as an outsider, to me, it seems that Pakistan is going to definitely head for a default the way its economy is working.
Right.
And we have to develop our responses accordingly to ensure that Pakistan is put to more economic difficulties. May not be through China, but it owes a lot of money to world bodies, to IMF, to World Bank, to other countries, whether bilaterally or multilaterally. Not that the foreign policy, I must admit here that Indian foreign policy has been very good. You can see it from the response Pakistan got from OIC, OIC to India, to put India in a sort of in a position whereby India could be seen as some sort of aggressor on Kashmir, but the OIC did not agree to it, which made Shah Mahmud Qureshi to virtually lambaste OIC and into threatening into holding a separate Islamic countries meeting, and finally on which Saudi Arabia asked them to repay its debt of $3 billion and also stopped its oil credit facility of $3.2 billion. And more than that, the Arab countries, including UAE, Saudi, they have been generally and tacitly approving our Kashmir policy and our foreign affairs policy, and they have not been coming to the aid and rescue of Pakistan in condemning India. The only countries, as brought out earlier, like Turkey and Malaysia, they are known for their views, and we should not get bothered too much about them. They are not great powers to put any pressure on India, and in trying to get their support, it will only lose our good friends if we try to gain their support, because Iran and Saudi, Malaysia and Turkey seem to be incorrigible. Turkey, especially as long as Erdogan is there, his viewpoints, his personal viewpoints especially, are very well known, and he's not going to detract from his Islamic fundamentalism policy into driving his country forward.
Right.
Iran is concerned. Iran is also distancing away from Pakistan because of treatment meted out to Shias. And whereas Saudi and Iran are enemies with each other, interestingly, Pakistan is friendly, is no friends to both of these countries. So that gives us a that is something which should make us appreciate our dealing with these countries. Afghanistan their policy is well known. The Haqqani network, which is being run there by Pakistan, the type of turbulence which Pakistan has created through terrorism by supporting the Taliban groups in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, interestingly, has been the only country which has opposed membership right from the beginning.
Right. Sir, if you can just wrap up in the next 2-3 minutes.
So what I mean to say that we have to keep our options open. We have to aggressively go for overt and covert operations against Pakistan, strike their bases in the way Osama bin Laden was hit in Pakistan by the US. We have to develop the capabilities of Israel, the way it has been dealing with its enemies who have been trying to question its sovereignty. And beyond that, we have to increase our diplomatic pressure on Pakistan and the economic measures we have to see so that Pakistan gets strangled. It is made to pay heavily for its misadventures against India, particularly in J&K, so that it comes back to its senses and behaves normally as any good neighbor. Thank you very much.
All right. Interesting. We've had two presentations that are, if possible, diametrically the opposite of each other. Both of them coming to this debate from a very strong perspective of how India must defend itself. But one, General K.J. Singh speaking about the necessity then to go beyond, to engage, to look at a geopolitical situation that, while it is troublesome for Pakistan, has not actually isolated Pakistan. And Mr. Kuldeep Khoda saying pretty much that India must use all three policies. It must do hard diplomacy to isolate Pakistan. He used the word strangle. as well as to use trade measures, economic measures against Pakistan, as well as the military measures that have already been tried in the last few years, and some of that needs to continue, and it can only continue, he said, if you actually are, if you close engagement, because engagement then delays India's ability to respond. We have a few more speakers, so I'm going to ask Professor Nalapat to come into this debate now, and I'm hoping again that you will link it, because it's important for us not just to talk about how to confront Pakistan, but how to confront Pakistan in a way we can address the issue of the day, which is the issue of the ethnic cleansing several decades ago of Kashmiri Pandits, and the eventual restoration and rehabilitation of those of the community back in the valley in particular. Professor Nalapat?
Madam Chairperson, thank you very much. I would first of all like to say that I think we are all united here in the respect and admiration that we have for the Kashmiri Pandit community. Now, this was not a community which, for example, lived off in any way other than the legal way and in a proper and productive way. They led peaceful lives. They were good neighbors. They were good fathers. They were good friends, and they remained so to the very end of their when they were in their home state. So I'd like to say that this is a model community, and across the world, may I point out that the Kashmiri community, which has been treated in this very shoddy and painful manner, it has undergone, for example, what I may say the Sikh community underwent when the partition took place, and there was a slaughter of this very noble community, and so many people, suffered. So many families suffered, and so many had to come across the border. And let me tell you, this community, without any ado, picked itself up by the bootstraps, and today is among the most progressive communities in the country, as indeed are the Kashmiri Pandits. So I'd only like to say, Madam Chairperson, Pakistan has succeeded in rubbing out almost the memory of this particular ethnic cleansing. It is part genocide, part ethnic cleansing. I would define it as genocide and a combination of genocide and ethnic cleansing. It's one of the most ugly episodes in human history. Now, we have had genocides in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and very correctly, the world reacted very strongly to them. We have had a terrible genocide by a psychotic killer named Adolf Hitler of some of the most talented individuals in the world, belonging to a community that has enriched the world in culture, in literature, in art, in music, in science, and so much else, the Jewish community. And till today, the memory of that genocide is, the flames of that memory are kept alive and should be kept alive for eternity, as should be indeed the memory of other genocides. Mr. Erdogan has sought to consign the Armenian massacre under the carpet. But even that particular genocide, it refuses to be under the carpet. But may I point out that so far as the genocide of the Kashmiri Pandit is concerned, well, I can only say that this genocide has been under the carpet almost from the time it took place, and has largely remained under the carpet, not only globally, but in India. And this is despite the fact that this is a model community, despite the fact that, like the Sikh community, which has not talked about vengeance or retribution or taking to the path of violence and extremism to achieve their goals. I mean, there have been a few individuals, if I may say so, who have been incentivized from across the border, a few individuals of all communities, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, etc., who have been incentivized. But otherwise, like Hindus, like Christians, like Sikhs, like Muslims, this community has remained free of the virus that those across the border sought to spread. In the same way, the Kashmiri Pandit community has reacted with such, if I may say so, grace, forbearance, moderation. I mean, I hate to use the word tolerance in this kind of thing because frankly, it's intolerable what happened and one should not use the word tolerance. But the grace and moderation that the community has shown in the face of this injustice reminds me of a similar grace and tolerance that have been shown by other communities in India who have suffered from this pernicious two-nation theory, three-nation theory, four-nation theory, five-nation theory that today, let me tell you, is tearing Pakistan apart. Pakistan is not just two nations, it's 5 or 6 nations, and it will soon become 7 or 8 nations, and it is tearing itself apart because of the theory that created it, that two human beings, because of their faith, because of their beliefs, because of their dress, because of their diet, because of these matters, which are personal matters, belong to, quote unquote, two nations. So I'd only like to say that Pakistan has succeeded in presenting a genocide that was never there. And that is supposed the genocide. I mean, I've gone multiple times in multiple fora, and I've been asked multiple times about this so-called genocide in 1947 of lakhs and lakhs of Kashmiri Muslims in Jammu. I mean, I've been asked so many times, and the last time I was asked this was about 6 weeks ago by responsible people, people who have done their PhDs, people who are the professors in universities. And you have, I mean, as far as I know, as far as my study of the historical record goes, this is a historical absurdity that such a genocide took place. So a fake genocide has spread across the whole world and is accepted by so many individuals who are not inclined towards supporting Pakistan or supporting terror or violence as accurate because of the propaganda of Pakistan, and a genuine genocide because, if I may say so, less than whether it's because of will, whether it's because of intention, whether it's because of competence, I have no idea. But a genocide that has been completely ignored by humanity and the rest of the world almost ever since it took place. So I simply want to say that, first of all, let me say that along with many others, I pay tribute to this noble community. And I would like to say that wherever there are Kashmiri Pandits, it is a benefit to the society in which they are living. And I'd like to say, if they go back to the Kashmir Valley will be a more fragrant, a much better place once they are accepted back and made welcome. Not if they go back under threat of violence or whatever, but when they go back and they are welcomed as the good citizens they have always been in Kashmir. Forget about, now they've always been good citizens. And there was, in my mind, absolutely no reason for this genocide except what you say, ethnic cleansing. Madam Chairperson, I'm using your words, ethnic cleansing. And I'd like to say it is a failure on the part of India that we have not put front and center before the conscience of the world the ethnic cleansing that has taken place of the Pandit community in Jammu and Kashmir. It is a gross, egregious failure, and I would like to blame all of ourselves, including people like you and me, who are only part of civil society, who have never had a role in government, in any capacity. Even us, we share, in my view, part of the blame for that by accepting that, oh, it's under the carpet, so okay, why should we lift the carpet? Why should we bother about it? It's too much trouble. Let it remain under the carpet. We'll do that some other time when somebody else. Well, I think it's time to pick that carpet up. I think it's time to pick that carpet up because it illustrates the risks of any kind of separation of human beings on the grounds of language, of religion, of diet, of lifestyle, of dress. What is happening in the United States, for example? I mean, it has been a hypothesis of mine and I'm used to building scenarios. In my department in the university, we work on scenarios, and it has been a hypothesis of mine that these days, given the artificial intelligence capabilities and technological competencies of some of those who are the enemies of the United States, who are the enemies of India. I mean, it need not be two the same countries. You may have, for example, say China and Pakistan, for example, who are clearly inimical to India. You may have Russia and China, who are inimical to the United States. Well, Pakistan doesn't have much of capabilities, but if you have a force multiplier which is helping it, I can tell you that fault lines can be expanded in India as they have been expanded in the United States. And what happened on January 6th was the culmination of a process that began, in my view, with the election of Barack Obama as the first African American president. It didn't begin with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a beneficiary. And as I've written in the Sunday Guardian a few days ago, I mean, making out that this is a Trump, a Trump kind of a wave. It's like saying A.Q. Khan was the has the sole responsibility for the Pakistan nuclear bazaar. We all know GHQ Rawalpindi, establishment in Pakistan, Hawala operators, narcotic smugglers, all of them had their role to play in the illicit nuclear and missile bazaar of Pakistan. And ultimately what happened? One man, one Superman, A.Q. Khan alone was responsible and nobody else was. And today, one gentleman, we're not going to call him Superman, poor fellow, after he went after the Kurds and threw them under the bus. I've been pretty nasty about him, where earlier I was very complimentary about him. And when I saw the surrender of the Taliban, I've been even nastier about Donald Trump. But I'd like to say that, this is the point I would like to make very clearly, that it's now up to us in India to ensure that this genocide is brought out from under the carpet and exposed in plain sight of the world. So anybody talking about human rights, anybody talking about violations, etc., let them compare what happened to the Kashmiri pundits and let them compare. There are certainly some violations of human rights in Kashmir have been going on every year, if I may say so. Right. But in comparison to what happened to the Kashmiri pundits, I can assure you, and in many ways, those human rights violations have to be juxtaposed. The gross human rights violation of making a state become insecure, unstable, and enter the world of terror. I have watched, Madam Chairperson, Syria, a country I've visited more often than once during Bashar Assad's time, his father's time, descend into a chaotic meltdown. I have been to Kashmir, and not as often as I've been to Punjab in the 1980s, but I've been to Kashmir in the 1990s especially, and I can tell you, it is with great sorrow that you see what Pakistan has done to that state. And it is with great sorrow that so many of us don't understand what the poison that has been injected in that state, and we concentrate on the side effects of some of the unfortunate effects of what I say so, of the reaction. And it may add sometimes reaction which is grossly impermissible and which is inadmissible, but a reaction to what has been done by Pakistan. I'd like to say this is a failure and we need to rectify that failure, which is why, I've taken time out from writing my book. I am in the middle of my chapter. I must apologize that I have to go back to my chapters. My publisher is very upset. I had a long call with her today, and she was not happy at all that the book should have been given to her by November, and it's today January, and it's not been given to her. But so excuse me from this. Again, I'd like to say thank you, Aditya Tikku, for inviting me here. Allow me to pay my tributes to a great people, and allow me to say their suffering needs to be brought out before the world, so the world's conscience will be asked, do you have a conscience or not? Sure. And if you don't have a conscience, well then, don't lecture anybody on human rights. Madam Chairperson, Please forgive my rant. God bless you. God bless this audience. God bless my country. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is not about a rant. This is about an important point you are raising. Just as previous speakers have spoken about ways of confronting Pakistan, Professor Nalapad there, making the single clear point: don't pretend like this is over. Don't pretend like this didn't happen, or if it's happened, we can move on from it. Part of confronting Pakistan is going to mean bringing out what happened to Kashmiri Pandits front and center in India's international policy. I'd like to turn to our next speaker, and we have a surprise guest at the end. So if I could ask Dr. Ajay Chungu to speak to us. He's the chairman, Padun Kashmir. But if you could keep it to about 8 to 10 minutes, because we do want to get to the next speakers as well.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
I hope you are my audio is okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll speak less than 8 minutes. I'll not create any time problem for you. The first thing I want to say at the beginning of my submission is that it's time that we recognize that Pakistan was created by unleashing the genocide in the subcontinent. Pakistan is essentially a genocidal state. And this genocidal process did not stop with the creation of Pakistan. In fact, the genocides for which Pakistan is responsible replicated. Immediately after the partition, a genocide was unleashed on Jammu and Kashmir, in Pak-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And after that, we saw what happened within Pakistan. We saw what happened in Bangladesh. The people there were subjected to genocide. And then within the Pakistan itself, we are seeing what is happening in Balochistan. We have seen the attrition wars going on in the Sindh. All these processes, they are basically and essentially genocidal processes. And unless and until we realize that Pakistan, the very construction of Pakistan, has made it an epicenter of genocidal war on the people of the undivided India, we will not be able to delineate our relationship with Pakistan in a very stable way, in a very futuristic way. Number one, this was the first point I wanted to make. The second thing which I want to say is that if the state of India cannot address a genocide on its own territory unleashed by Pakistan, how can it address genocides perpetrated on the people of India or the people who belong to the civilization of India on the territory of Pakistan or elsewhere? It's not possible. So what happened to Kashmiri Pandits through the aiding, collaboration, abetting, and sponsorship of Pakistan is an elaborate process, and elaborate genocidal process. And this genocidal process, if we are able to address, we will be able to address ultimately what you call as the attrition which Pakistan is waging all around. Pakistan is not only a genocidal state, it's a state which is the epicenter of international jihad, which is the epicenter of terrorism. Now, all these things can be stopped at the very character, and its implications are brought to the center stage. So it's very important that we realize it from that perspective, that and the creation of Pakistan, the ideology of Pakistan, and ultimately the state of Pakistan, they nourish genocides. They nourish genocides outside, they nourish genocides on their own territory. Now, the second submission which I want to make here is that Kashmiri Pandits were caught up in a very grim situation. On one side, Pakistan abetted, aided terrorist movement in Kashmir, the separatist movement in Kashmir. They chose Kashmiri Pandits as the first frontline target the moment it got militarized. So we were the frontline victim of the militarization of the pan-Islamic fundamentalism which Pakistan unleashed on this nation. But at the same time, we became the victims of a process which was far more grim and far more critical. That was the process of denial of genocide. And this denial of genocide, for its own reason, was done by the successive governments over the years in India. So a small community was caught up between two genocidal processes, a genocide and a process of denial of genocide. What I would suggest on this day, this will be a very humble appeal to the leadership of India, to the government of India. Since this government has taken a very, very decisive step when they banned Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, they delineated this fact, both orally and in written, that JKLF was responsible for the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. Yes, JKLF was responsible for genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. So were other actors also. So there has to be the denial process has to be put an end to. Kashmiri Hindus are still being described as migrants, as if they had voluntarily been displaced from Kashmir. They had come out, and their coming out was a self-imposed sort of a migration. That is not the case. Now, this denial of genocide process has bigger linkages, and that is the third and the last point I want to make here. That you all know that uh, more than 23% population of Pakistan was non-Muslim, and at that time, a bizarre, what you call as a proposition was made by the leadership of this country and Pakistan. They created a concept of strategic hostages, and they said that the presence of Muslims in India will be a guarantee to the presence of Hindus in Pakistan, and presence of Hindus in Pakistan will be a guarantee to the presence of Muslims in India. Now, since India was going to become a secular country based on right to equality, the concept of strategic hostages on the Indian side, it could not have been accepted at any level. But basically, what we did at that point of time was we hostaged the entire population of non-Muslims, most of them being Hindus and Sikhs, to Pakistan. And over the years, this 23% population was subjected to a relentless process of proselytization and destruction. Now, the genocidal process, unless and until it is addressed, will not be able to change anything in the subcontinent. So right. my request is just in the end that please, this is the time that the nation should rise and realize that we are dealing with a moment whose epicenter is Pakistan, and that moment is basically aimed at destroying the humanity in this region. And then, unless and until Pakistan is brought to the in front of the world, and it is the state of Pakistan is brought to justice, I don't think there will be peace in the whole world. Thank you.
Okay. Sure, Dr. Chingu, thanks so much for addressing us. Some important points being made over there that Kashmiri Pandits were in fact the first victims of the kind of terrorism that we saw, the cross-border terrorism we saw in Pakistan in Jammu and Kashmir when the movement was militarized over there, and that it is necessary to change the nomenclature with which we deal with both the killings of Kashmiri Pandits in Jammu and Kashmir, as well as the circumstances that forced them to leave. So don't call them migrants. Refer to them, he didn't give an alternative, but I presume he means internal refugees, or make the point that they are still internally displaced. They have had to flee their homes, and it is not just about migration. Mr. Balbir Punch can join us now. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Punch. There's one part of this debate that has not been addressed so far, so I was hoping you might be able to address it. Nearly, or at least 18 months ago, the government went through this process of diluting Article 370, splitting Jammu and Kashmir into two parts, into two union territories. In fact, a very, very broad spectrum of changes in Jammu and Kashmir. We are not yet seeing that move address the problem of Kashmiri Pandits. So while there is one problem, which is decades long, and we've been speaking about it, there is another problem, which is that despite all of this being done, and I remember the kind of celebrations in the community when there was actually the announcement on August 5th, we're not actually seeing a reconciliation, rehabilitation, or any process towards bringing a closure to this chapter. So if you could address that as well, and after you speak, we have one more guest, so I would ask you to keep it as brief as possible.
Okay, Mrs. Haider, I find it really very amusing that you are expecting results so soon. You're so optimistic that a problem which has lingered for centuries in this subcontinent. Don't see 1947 as a cutoff point. Of course, it's an important milestone, and so is the dropping of 370 and 35A. But all the same, realize this war is almost 800 years old. That is number one. Number two, we must ask ourselves one question. That question is very important, and we need to have a very honest answer. And maybe the audience here are the people who are participating, the learned people who are participating in this program, they can throw some light. We have a constitution which is supposed to be secular. In 1976, Mrs. Gandhi, in emergency, added the word secular, as if the constitution or India was not a secular country prior to the addition of this word. So we are a secular country. There is a Supreme Court. There is free media. And you have all what you can say it takes to make a country a civilized country. You have a constitution in place. But what happened in 1989, 1991? Why couldn't all these organs of the state, the constitution, they could not come and help the Kashmiri Pandits who were virtually forced to flee in the darkness of the night? I don't know how many people were killed, how many women were raped. More than 3 dozen temples, once I have made a list, were either damaged or razed to ground. How many people were arrested? How many people were persecuted and prosecuted? How many convictions took place? The answer obviously is 0. So, number one, why couldn't this constitution, which we talk about, why couldn't the Supreme Court, why couldn't this media stop this, raise this issue, and why there has virtually been no convictions on these cases? If we can if you can answer this question honestly, maybe then we will also know how soon we can relocate the Pandit to the place where they belong to. The problem is constitution, laws, they are always in the context of the ecosystem. The valley, because it is almost 99% Islamic, didn't have the ecosystem to sustain the values of secularism. And as a result, when the Pandits or the Hindus, they were persecuted, they were killed, they were tortured, there was nobody to protect them. The protection to the minorities anywhere is not given by law alone. It is given by the ecosystem. So who changed the ecosystem in the valley? Massive conversions of the Hindus to Islam over the centuries. So we have to look at this entire problem in that context and hope that what Mr. Modi has initiated by making 370 and 35 totally ineffective or dropping and changing the situation. So the next logical thing, the resettlement of Pandits. And it's not the resettlement of Pandits, it is the resettlement of the Constitution of India, which is supposed to be secular. So let us hope that happens for. That is all what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, to speak about the ecosystem. Very important that the safety of minorities can only be guaranteed when the majority is a part of their protection. And that's a universal truth. It's a truth around the country and around the world as well. Justice, conviction in these cases, equally important. We now turn to, as I said, our special guest, TCA Raghavan. He is the director of the Indian Council for World Affairs, or Sapru House as it is known, ICWA, and of course has been High Commissioner to Pakistan. He was there, in fact, when Prime Minister Modi made that visit to Lahore, and he has written about Pakistan as well as so many interesting books about India, the independence movement, and all the rest. Mr. Raghavan, thank you so much for joining us. You know, so far our conversation has actually taken a whole gamut of responses to Pakistan that are necessary when you confront the external threat. in Jammu and Kashmir. But many of them are things that we have spoken about for a very, very long time in terms of whether or not to continue engagement or not, to try the hard power options or not, try soft diplomacy or not, economic measures against Pakistan, also the importance of bringing Pakistan to account. That truth and reconciliation in Jammu and Kashmir can only follow if there is some accountability. There is eventually some kind of an apology, which Bangladesh is still waiting for, as I said, since 1971. My question to you would also be, when it comes to confronting Pakistan, particularly with a view, as we are discussing today, what happened in 1990 to Kashmiri Pandits in particular, do you think we have seen in the last few years new options emerge? And how is the whole geopolitical situation really moving this entire debate? We'd be grateful for your insights.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I joined late, but Aditya Tikku asked me to join in the end to make some comments, but I missed some of the earlier speakers. But may I begin by congratulating both Mr. Shekhar Dutt and Aditya Tikku for organizing this. I think it's only appropriate that we constantly recall what went wrong in 1989, 1990. But I missed some of the earlier speakers, so I don't really have a full sense of what was discussed. My idea was, my impression was that in this panel, we are going to be discussing specifically the challenges which arise from a neighbor such as Pakistan. But I find since other aspects have also come in, I'd just like to confine myself to making three brief points. Firstly, history and historical memory is like an endless pit. Once you descend into it and you are determined to confront its monsters, there's no escaping it. And certainly we can go on about the history of India for 1,000 years or for the last 75 years, but we will never find answers which will satisfy either us or the audience which we want to satisfy, because history is always written from different points of view. So where did the Holocaust begin in 1947? We will never have an answer, because certainly there was a major episode of ethnic cleansing in India, in the subcontinent, in 1947, 1948. To what extent were developments in Punjab replicated in some parts of Jammu and Kashmir? Is one aspect of that question. But there was a wider process of ethnic cleansing which was taking place, and we cannot really insulate what happened in Jammu and Kashmir from that process. As I said, it's easy to sink into this pit and never really emerge from it. But we then have to ask wider questions, that by engaging with these points of history, will we come up with answers which will enable us to face the challenges of today? And that is really the question we should be asking ourselves. Now, I heard Balbir Punji, I've known him for a long time. I don't know whether he will remember, but I remember he visited Pakistan many times when I was posted there. On one occasion, both of us went to the Katas Raj temples together, when in fact General Musharraf, with a great deal of fanfare, had started a project of rehabilitating and renovating those temples, and Shri Balbir Punj was present there as a special guest from India. Now, my sense of what he said then was that we can't keep looking to the past to try and find answers for the problems which confront us today. So, yes, I think in 1947, 1948, and similarly in 1989, 1990, a great deal of wrong was done. Possibly in 1947, 1948, a number of communities were equally aggrieved. In 1989, 1990, I think the Kashmiri Pandits were alone aggrieved. and a great injustice was done to them, both in terms of what happened and also possibly because there was no great sense of national outrage, and no political party or no political force or no civil society organization took it upon itself to express that outrage. But is the question today expressing an outrage which we felt, which should have been expressed 30 years ago? Or is the question today of finding answers which will lead to better possible solutions for the future, both of this community and also for Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh as a whole? I think that is a question which we have to confront. Merely, immersing ourselves into a past blame game will not really give us answers about how we want to confront the challenges of today and tomorrow. The second point really concerns Pakistan, and on Pakistan, there is never a clear answer. I think at every moment of our history, whoever has been in charge has been confronted with a menu of bad options. From those bad options, you exercise your judgment to choose the best possible policy course open to you. I think if you look at the performance of this government also, you find there's been a serious engagement with a whole range of options. In 2014, 2015, to some extent, even in 2016, what was practiced was a very, very diplomatic exercise of trying to engage with Pakistan. Now, because of internal developments in Pakistan, that particular diplomatic initiative or cluster of initiatives did not work. And because of certain developments which took place, in particular, the terrorist attack in Uri, thereafter the terrorist attack in Pulwama, we were forced to turn to more kinetic means to address these security threats. But the question really before us is, do kinetic options comprise the whole of a long-term policy? Or are they tactical options which we have to resort to, which any country would resort to when it's faced with a threat to its national security? But what else should be the options available to us? What else should be the components of our policy toolkit when we deal with a neighbor like Pakistan? Because we cannot wish it away. It is 200 million people. On the whole, regardless of what information comes out with regard to Balochistan and Sindh and other places, on the whole, the people of Pakistan are a nationalistic people. They have nuclear weapons. It is a problem which is going to remain with us. Can we outsource policy entirely to a set of kinetic practices? Can we outsource it simply to a problem which has to be handled on the LOC or on the international border? I think those are the serious questions which we have to engage with. As I said, no one has a perfect set of answers which will satisfy everybody. But I think we need to engage with these in a clinical way, in an objective way, and not necessarily in a way which will find answers to past or historical wrongs and rights. Because the rights and wrongs of history can never be settled by the present. What was done to two generations of Kashmiri Pandits over 30 years is something which no new set of policy measures can resolve that injustice. That has been done. It is over with. It is part of the burden which all countries carry in some form or the other about events in their past. But when we address the future, how do we address it with a certain amount of, as I said, clinical good sense, which is in our overall national interest? These are some of the thoughts which came to me, but thank you very much, Aditya Thinku, and thank you very much, sir, Mr. Shekhar Dutt, for inviting me today.
Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, for summing up at the end, because although you said you weren't able to hear all the questions that had come, The truth is that that you were able to bring together a lot of different thoughts that have actually been discussed in the last hour and a half. If I could put to you then the one question that we do have on our chat that's still waiting to be answered from Sagar Parab, who says, essentially, when we're talking about all the tools, and everybody has discussed different options in that toolkit you mentioned in confronting Pakistan in order to bring some kind of justice. His question is it not necessary to build better relations with the rest of our neighborhood and build an economic powerhouse inside India, which will then confront Pakistan better if you have a united rest of the neighborhood? I think that's more or less the question that he wanted to ask. He seems to be a little concerned that right now our relations with other countries in the neighborhood are not doing as well as they should. Did you have any thoughts about the, because we've discussed the bilateral objectives and bilateral options when it comes to dealing with Pakistan. He's talking about a regional approach. Is that something that we can look at?
I think for a country like India, regardless of what happens or doesn't happen with Pakistan, it is obviously in our self-interest that we have good relations with all our neighbors. Now, it is also a fact that relations between neighboring countries are seldom friction-free. And there is no perfect example of wonderful relations between neighboring countries. I mean, there are good examples and there are bad examples, but all neighboring country relationships are very, very difficult. I think our relations with our other neighbors are definitely much more stable and much more purposeful and much more forward-looking than is the case with Pakistan. And India-Pakistan relations in many ways are comparable to the chronic cases of bad neighborly relations which you have in the world today. I mean, you can look at Israel and some of its Arab neighbors. You can look at North and South Korea. It is in that league. But I think for civil society and for people like us, it is important that we do not take the here and the now as representing a permanent set of futures. I think one should always try to remedy the situation to the extent that we can, and certainly our investing in our own institutions is a good way of dealing with Pakistan. My experience of Pakistan has always been that regardless of what the state may say or regardless of what Pakistanis may say when they, for form's sake or whatever may be their stated positions, there's always been a great deal of admiration in Pakistan for India for a number of things. Most of all, for your democratic institutions, your Supreme Court, your election commission, the fact that you have smooth transitions, that you're a country which manages linguistic and religious diversity much more efficiently and effectively. I think for all of these reasons, there's always been an unstated admiration in Pakistan for India. And the more we invest in these attributes, I think to that extent, your task of dealing with Pakistan in the long term becomes that much easier. The less you invest in these attributes, that much becomes more difficult your task in dealing with Pakistan. I think one thing which has always helped India, and we should never let it go, where Pakistan is concerned, is this great sense of moral superiority which we have. Because of the fact that we have religious freedoms, because we have religious and linguistic diversity, because we have independent institutions, I think these are very, very important attributes which we should do whatever we can to secure and to consolidate further.
Right. Thank you for putting it so beautifully. But eventually, a secular, pluralistic, inclusive, democratic, institution-based Indian polity is eventually the best answer to a country like Pakistan, especially what it has done in the past. I'm going to wind up over here with a special thanks to all our guests, because each of you has come to this issue with so much experience in each of your fields, that your perspective is invaluable. And I think GCTC has done extremely well in bringing such an interesting group and such a balanced kind of idea of the debate at hand. That must be looked at. Today is a day of sorrow. Today is a day that we do remember the kind of horror, the terror, and the sadness that really this nation saw or felt. But it also marked a period in Jammu and Kashmir that essentially what can happen in a country where these protections are not in place. It is also sad that 30 years later we are having this discussion. It is sad that justice has not happened, that reconciliation has not taken place, that rehabilitation remains a distant memory, and the safety of bringing the community back to Jammu and Kashmir, to the valley, does not yet seem like a goal closer in sight. But I think the message we take away from this particular session is it is necessary to confront the external threat, but not give up hope that we will one day be able to have acknowledgement, bring the kind of reconciliation that is needed, not just in a sense for India, but for the entire region. And while we will have a number of options to use, and we will continue to use them, not lose sight of bringing this memory and bringing some kind of reconciliation to its rightful end at some point. So I'm going to thank Aditya Tikku. Thank you, Jamshid.
If I may ask a question, please.
And I hope to see you on the next.
And can I ask a question, please, if you allow?
You know, sir, we've run out completely of time, but I wish you'd put it on the group. But I hope we can take it in the next session, perhaps.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Ajay Charangu a question. If you slot it for the next...
I honestly have to finish at 5:30, but maybe you could stay on for the next session and ask your question there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all our guests.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being such a great moderator and chairperson. I also thank all the panelists for this session for joining us today. It was a wonderful session.